The wind carried ash from the burned lodges as the lone Comanche rode into the ravine, his horse picking its way carefully over blackened stones and broken arrows. He had not planned to stop. This land was heavy with death, and men who lingered too long here often joined the spirits before nightfall. He was reaching for his canteen when he heard it, a sound so faint it almost blended with the sigh of the wind. "Save me. Take me with you." The words trembled, thin and desperate, as if hope itself was afraid to speak too loudly. From behind a fallen cottonwood, 4 women stepped into the light. They were Apache widows, their hair loose in mourning, their dresses torn and dust-stained. Grief clung to them like smoke. One of them fell to her knees before him, fingers digging into the dry earth as she looked up with hollow eyes. The others stood close, as if separating would cause them to shatter. They did not beg with many words. Their faces said enough. Their husbands were gone. Their protection was gone. Their tribe had no mercy left for women who reminded them of loss. The Comanche's jaw tightened. Widows were dangerous to carry, not because they were weak, but because the world hunted them. He had learned long ago that survival meant traveling light and alone. He shook his head and turned his horse slightly away, already feeling the weight of their disappointment. That was when a sharp cry split the air. From the ridge above, Apache scouts appeared, painted for blood, eyes fixed on the women. The widows gasped, terror freezing them in place. The Comanche moved without thought. His rifle came up, the crack of the shot echoing through the ravine. One scout fell and the others scattered, shocked by resistance where they had expected helpless prey. Dust settled, silence returned, broken only by ragged breathing. The widows stared at the Comanche as if he had torn death itself from the sky. He could still leave. The danger was not over, only delayed. He looked at their bare, bleeding feet, the bruises on their wrists, the small beaded tokens they wore for children who would never return. Something in his chest shifted, heavy and unavoidable. He exhaled slowly and faced them again. "All of you," he said, voice firm. "If you ride with me, you obey my word." Hope rushed into their eyes like dawn breaking after endless night. In that moment, as they gathered their few belongings and moved toward him, the Comanche understood the truth. He had not saved one life, but 4 destinies, and none of them would ever be the same again. They rode before the sun fully rose, the Comanche setting a hard pace, as if distance itself could shield them. The widows followed on borrowed horses, swaying with exhaustion, but refusing to fall behind. Dust coated their faces, mixing with dried tears, and yet none complained. Every sound behind them felt like pursuit, every bird taking flight, like a warning. The Comanche watched the land closely, reading tracks and broken brush, the way other men read words. He knew they were being hunted. It was only a matter of time. By midday, heat pressed down on them like a weight. One widow nearly slipped from her saddle, her hands trembling as she clutched the reins. The Comanche slowed and tossed her his canteen without a word. She drank carefully, then passed it to the others, each sip shared as if it was sacred. When they stopped briefly in the shade of a rock overhang, the eldest woman spoke, her voice steady despite the ache in her eyes. She told him how their husbands had died within the same season, one to sickness, 2 to raids, 1 to a hunting accident that no one had witnessed. With no warriors left to speak for them, they were no longer seen as wives, only as burdens. The Comanche listened, saying nothing. He had heard such stories before, though rarely from lips that still carried dignity instead of bitterness. When distant riders appeared on the horizon, he stood at once. He led the widows into a narrow cut between rocks, placed them low and silent, then climbed the ridge alone. When the Apache pursuers came close, he struck fast, firing and moving, turning the land itself against them. Confusion spread through their ranks, and soon they withdrew, unwilling to lose more men for 4 women they believed already broken. As evening fell, they traveled again, slower now, fear settling into weary bones. One widow collapsed at dusk, her skin burning with fever. Without hesitation, the Comanche lifted her onto his own horse, steadying her with one arm as they rode. That night he built a small, hidden fire and divided the last of his dried meat. The widows ate quietly, gratitude shining in their eyes more brightly than the flames. As stars filled the sky, the Comanche stared into the dark, realizing how much the road had changed. He had set out alone, owing nothing to anyone. Now 4 lives slept under his watch, trusting him with what little hope they had left. For the first time in many years, the weight he carried did not feel like a burden, but like purpose. The land changed as they rode north, the canyons opening into wide plains where the wind never seemed to rest. With every mile, the widows grew quieter, not from fear alone, but from the knowledge of where the Comanche was taking them. Crossing into his people's territory meant safety from Apache hunters, yet it also meant judgment. Old hatred ran deep between tribes, and 4 Apache widows could be seen as spies, curses, or reasons for war. The women felt it in their bones, and when distant riders finally appeared, their hands tightened on their reins. The Comanche raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He rode forward alone, meeting the patrol beneath an open sky. Sharp words followed, suspicious eyes scanning the women in the distance. Why bring enemies among them? Why risk the anger of the council? The Comanche answered without raising his voice. He spoke of women abandoned by fate, of honor lost when the helpless were cast aside, of strength proven not by killing, but by protection. His calm did more than anger ever could. After a long silence, the riders escorted them toward the camp. The council gathered before sunset. Elders sat in a half-circle, faces carved by years of war and survival. The widows were brought forward, heads high despite the fear pressing on their chests. Murmurs rippled through the gathering as the Comanche stood before them, claiming responsibility for all 4. When questions turned sharp, the eldest widow stepped forward. With trembling hands, she placed her husband's knife on the ground between them, a symbol of truth and loss. She spoke of exile, of choosing the danger of the road over a life without dignity, and of the man who had saved them when no one else would. Night fell heavy with tension. Before a decision could be made, shouts rose from the edge of the camp. Apache raiders struck under darkness, believing the widows would draw confusion and fear. Instead, they met resistance. The Comanche fought alongside his people, and the widows did not hide. They carried water to the wounded, warned of movement, and stood unflinching as arrows flew. By dawn, the attackers were gone, leaving silence and proof of loyalty behind. As the sun rose, the council spoke again. Their voices changed. The widows were granted shelter under Comanche protection, no longer prisoners of fate, but members on trial of courage. Trust had been earned not through words, but through standing together when it mattered most. Seasons turned, and the camp no longer looked at the 4 women as shadows from an enemy past, but as living parts of the people. The widows shed the torn garments of grief and learnt new ways, without forgetting their own. They rose with the dawn, worked beside Comanche women, and slowly laughter found its way back into their voices. The man who had brought them here watched the change quietly, never claiming credit, only standing guard as they rebuilt themselves piece by piece. Each widow found a path shaped by both loss and strength. One learned the healing ways of roots and poultices, her gentle hands steady even in the worst injuries. Another took to the hunt, her aim sharp, her movements silent as the plains wind. The third became a keeper of stories, teaching children both Apache and Comanche tales, so memory would not die with old wounds. The youngest, once broken by fear, grew fierce in her loyalty, standing watch at night and earning respect with her unyielding courage. They were no longer known as widows, but by their names and deeds. The Comanche himself changed as well. He had believed solitude was the only way to survive, the caring too deeply invited loss. Yet in protecting the 4 women, he found a different strength, one that did not leave him hollow at night. He learned to share meals, to listen, to sit by the fire without needing silence to feel whole. The past still lived in him, but it no longer ruled him. One evening, as the sky burned red and gold, the eldest woman stood beside him on a low ridge overlooking the camp. Children laughed below, their voices carried on the breeze. "You could have taken one of us," she said softly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "One would have been enough to prove your mercy." The Comanche nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Leaving any behind would have meant death," he replied, "and I would not choose which soul was worth saving." Word of what he had done traveled far beyond the plains. Some called him reckless, others foolish. But among those who knew the truth, his story became something rarer than victory in battle. It was a reminder that even in a world shaped by war, a single choice to protect the helpless could change many lives. And for the 4 women who once begged on a broken road, that choice became the beginning of everything they had thought was lost forever.